low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jim Michaely, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the June 6th, 7th edition of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First up, here's a story from the front page titled, World Cup Fever Has Come to the U.S. It only took decades to arrive. As an avid soccer fan, I've watched the sport's slow and steady rise from the days when games weren't broadcast here on television. The story is by Roger Bennett. Football is democratic capitalism, declared Representative Jack Kemp, a former professional quarterback, whereas soccer is a European socialist sport. That remark was delivered the first time FIFA gave the nod to the U.S. to host the World Cup in 1994. Some nations might have declared it a national holiday. Here it was met with a quip and a sneer. I think it is important for all those young men out there who someday may hope to play real football, Kemp said, where you throw it and kick it and run it and put it in your hands. As the country charges toward World Cup 2026, with 48 teams, 104 games, and 3 host nations, making it the biggest ever, the profile of the game in this nation has never felt loftier. But for any American under 30 salivating at the spectacle to come, don't be fooled. The growth of the sport in this country has been a slow, arduous, often self-sabotaging grind. When Kemp issued his jibe, I'd recently moved here from the UK, lured to Chicago, fresh out of university, by the movies of John Hughes, the music of Public Enemy, and the exploits of the Chicago Bears. As thrilling as it was to immerse myself in American sports, English football was my foundational text. Hailing from Liverpool, a town in which the sport is to the city what high school football is to Texas, I made sense of the world through soccer. I was aware before I arrived that it had outsider status here. Still, I was stunned by how hard it was to find like-minded fans. In a national survey of favorite spectator sports released shortly after my arrival, soccer ranked 67th. Tractor pulling was 66th. One journalist at the time compared the opportunity of hosting the world's biggest sport event to holding a major skiing competition in an African country. World Cup '94 was FIFA's attempt to seduce its largest remaining untapped audience. But Americans were not merely apathetic toward the game, some took a perverse delight in openly despising it. The moment of truth came on June 16, 1994, when the opening game was held at Soldier Field in my adopted hometown of Chicago. The night before, my mood ricocheted between the childlike anticipation I always experience on the eve of the World Cup and an unshakable terror that no one would turn up. National polling 3 weeks before had revealed that 71% of Americans were unaware it was about to be played here. The possibility that it would unfurl before empty stadiums felt very real. I was too impoverished to spring for a $25 ticket for the match, which featured reigning World Cup champions Germany against Bolivia. Yet I felt a need, more than that, a responsibility, to travel to the stadium to pay witness to the scene, and, if needed, help fill in as an extra to create the illusion of a crowd. With a searing sense of relief, I found Soldier Field as abuzz as if the Bears were playing the Packers. Sure, it seemed like half of Baden-Württemberg was there, along with every Bolivian within 100 miles, but there were also thousands of local families with a crackling sense of anticipation. The fact that many there seemed to know little about what was about to happen felt like nitpicking. That emotion was reinforced by a large screen near the gate running a video of Tommy Lasorda, then manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, declaring his unshakable belief that even if the country had no idea what the World Cup was, America would win it. When the U.S. players took the field for the first time, doubts swirled around them. The country lacked a professional league. I laughed as my cheap TV made it appear as if they were warming up wearing foul, stonewashed denim jerseys. Then a commentator mentioned how the U.S. team was in fact wearing foul, stonewashed denim jerseys. That's when I fell in love with those goatee and mullet sporting risk takers, whose fortunes seemed directly tied to the growth of the game. Thankfully, the U.S. acquitted itself adequately, reaching the first knockout round, when the team was promptly clipped, on July 4th no less, by the eventual winner, Brazil. Although TV ratings continued to rise after they had lost, the ultimate impact was muted. Those who expected American appetites to be transformed were disappointed. The spike in interest quickly burned off as if the World Cup were a circus that thrilled before leaving town. A year later, when my club team Everton reached the semifinal of a major tournament, I was unable to find a cable channel carrying the game. I called my father in Liverpool and persuaded him to hold his telephone against the radio so I could hear the broadcast. A long-distance connection worth every cent of an eye-bulging bill that took 7 months to pay off. Each time I chipped away at my debt, I felt a numbing angst that it was as if the World Cup had never happened. And yet, each tournament since has allowed an ever larger number of Americans to fall in love with the game, leaving an avid, curious new fan base in its wake. The Economist recently reported that 1 in 10 Americans now name soccer as their favorite sport, narrowly edging out baseball at 9%, as the nation's third most popular, behind football and basketball. How that happened is a complicated story, often credited to the arrival of global billboards like David Beckham and Lionel Messi, but in reality more attributable to several drivers below the surface. Prime among them is the fact that global soccer is the perfect sport for the internet era. Just as baseball thrived in the golden age of radio and the NFL boomed in the television era, soccer thrived with the arrival of the internet, which empowered Americans to connect to ongoing storylines in real time. Fans in Manchester, New Hampshire were suddenly able to follow the soap opera at Manchester United, while supporters in Madrid, New Mexico could decode the Kremlinological goings-on of Real Madrid. Streaming has also transformed fandom. Every service craves audiences die-hard enough to cough up $10.99 a month. Few have proven as devoted as global football fans. I can now watch more Premier League football live from New York City than in England. And the success of the women's national team gave America what it needed, a team that could make the nation proud by doing what we love best, kicking ass and taking names. Electronic Arts' FIFA franchise, recently rebranded as EA Sports FC, has also helped, seeding a familiarity of the game and its Star Wars cantina of teams, competitions, and stars across U.S. sports-loving fans who might otherwise have discarded soccer as an adolescent rite of passage. The love affair has not gone unrequited. Over the previous decade, the world's powerhouses, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, and Juventus, have become obsessed with America, sensing the virgin terrain, audience size, and corporate-sponsored density as the perfect target at which to evangelize their brands. While those colossi dreamed of taking over the U.S. market, American sports owners took over the powerhouses. Half of the Premier League teams, including Arsenal, Manchester United, Chelsea, and Liverpool, now have American owners. Commercially, the game is about to enter its American century. The oddest kicker to this? Not much of that enthusiasm has transferred to the U.S. men's national team, which has won just one World Cup knockout game. One incredible moment off a U.S. foot could change all that. Supporting the U.S. team used to be a given for American fans, but as they felt welcome among global fan bases, something shifted. Now when I fly to London, the plane feels like a party bus, filled with Americans traveling to watch their favorite Premier Leagues in the flesh. Where is tractor pulling now? Roger Bennett is the founder and CEO of the Men in Blazers Media Network and the author of the memoir, We Are the World Cup. Here's a story titled, Why Restaurants Are Charging $40 for Chicken. The cost of the beloved Yardbird has shot up on menus across the U.S. It's driving Americans nuts. Dawn Eldridge, owner of the Brooklyn restaurant The Sparrow, has purposely kept chicken off the menu since opening 2 years ago. Diners are happy to pay upscale prices for other meat dishes, she says, But fancy chicken, even if it is expensive to prepare, provokes people in a different way. It creates sticker shock in a way that steak or lobster may not, says Aldridge. Chicken has become the flashpoint because people expect it to be priced like it was 10 years ago. It's an era of chicken angst. In the 2000s, customers complained about expensive burgers. In the 2010s, it was avocado toast and kale salad. Now, because of a mix of slim restaurant margins, inflation, a national protein obsession, and consumer expectations, the beloved yard bird has become a proxy for the affordability crisis. Pricing it can be more emotional than steak or seafood, say restaurateurs. Once associated with French bistros, upscale chicken dishes have spread across cuisines, and prices have followed. Chicken dish prices grew 22% over the past 4 years in fine dining restaurants, according to Data Essential, a Chicago-based firm. The median cost of a chicken entree is $28, more than fish and shellfish entries, both at $25, despite chicken being a lower cost ingredient, according to the firm's 2026 data. The data set excluded market pricing for seafood and other variably priced dishes. In New York City, it's fairly common to see chicken dishes priced much higher. At Chez Fifi on the Upper East Side, the poulet rôti served by the half portion is $78. At Gramercy Tavern, the brick-pressed chicken, cooked in a wood-burning fire, is $36. In April, Gigi's, a Brooklyn restaurant that bills itself as a rotisserie wine bar, became the subject of local debate after a councilman from a nearby district, Chi Osei, posted a message on Instagram that said, simply, $40 half chicken at a wine bar? Really? Though Osei didn't specify any restaurant, Gigi's, which serves a $40 half chicken, became a target in the fallout from his post, said the restaurateur, Hugo Hivernay, in an email, citing fake Google reviews, aggressive calls, and messages. Hivernay says he spoke with Osei on the phone and has invited the councilman to eat at Gigi's, though Osei has not yet visited. We would genuinely love to have a deeper conversation about what it's like to try and open and run a small business in New York City, Hivernay says. New York chef Jason Hall, who serves a whole rotisserie chicken at Cathedral Restaurant for $78, says the high price leaves less room for error. The restaurant, owned by the Tao Group Hospitality and located inside Moxie East Village, starts cooking the chicken at 4:30 p.m. each day, so they are fresh throughout the night. The dish is popular, but if you don't execute it correctly, people are going to be upset with you, he says. Emmeline Rood, author of Tastes Like Chicken, A History of America's Favorite Bird, says, the shock comes from this dissonance. We don't think of it as a luxury food. Chicken was once considered a pricier option, on par with beef, until about the 1950s, during the expansion of industrial farming. But Americans have for decades been conditioned to think of chicken as a budget bird, something to be plucked from the supermarket in a pinch. In 2022, Lee Wolin, a chef in Chicago, opened Gigi's Chicken Shop, a casual spot from the Boca Restaurant Group that offers $24 rotisserie chickens. It leaves some customers comparing the cost to Costco's $4.99 rotisserie, a loss leader that results in added sales by getting customers into the warehouse retailer's door. We've heard it all, and we don't want you if you're coming in looking for Costco prices, Wolin says. We don't make our money off mattresses and TVs. The Costco-style habituation makes chicken an ingredient that feels like it should always be available at accessible prices, no matter what happens to the economy, similar to how Americans view eggs. Cheap chicken ticks a lot of boxes, and expensive chicken violates those boxes, Rude says. People see it as a symbol of their own quality of life. Another problem for American chefs is that diners often assume they can recreate a labor-intensive, high-quality chicken dish at home, says Alex Eaton, culinary director of restaurant La Cave in Charleston, South Carolina. Eaton uses a carefully sourced heritage breed bird that's brined, deboned, and served in butter for $35. The prep takes nearly 2 days, but I'm glad it's coming off as seeming effortless, she says. Wolin, the chief partner at Boca Restaurant Group, addresses the problem at Boca, a Michelin-starred restaurant in Chicago, by offering his $43 chicken breast, stuffed with truffle and sausage, at a lower price point, accepting a slimmer margin. Rather than alienating his customers by charging about $50, which is what the chicken should cost, Wolin says, he has increased the price of other entrees. Customers are a lot less likely to blink at a $65 duck breast. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Under the review banner in the paper, here is a story titled, "What Was Jill Biden Thinking?" Read her memoir. But first, the former First Lady talks about her husband's health, losing the East Wing, and Nancy Pelosi. Story is written by Kara Vogt. Jill Biden knows people are mad about her new book. They're mad that she's only now disclosing that she thought her husband, former President Joe Biden, was having a stroke during his debate against Donald Trump. They're mad that she publicly praised his debate performance after the fact. "You answered every question. You knew all the facts." Even though she privately agreed with Joe's assessment that he had effed up. They're mad that this book exists at all, picking at Democrats' scabs from the 2024 presidential election. Not that anyone has expressed that anger to her face. But today's day one, she says with a small laugh, so who knows what's to come. It's Monday morning, the day before the publication of her memoir, View from the East Wing. Few know the full extent of what the former First Lady discloses in the book. If they know anything, it comes from interview clips that revealed what Jill was thinking as she watched her husband on stage saying something nonsensical about beating Medicare, as she puts it in the book. It's one chapter in 35 chapters, she tells me. They're going to see that this is not a political book. This memoir, she says, is about being an ordinary woman living an extraordinary life, about work-life balance and the demands of modern femininity, about her life as a teacher, as a grandmother, as a First Lady. "I was and am a political spouse," Jill 75 says, but it wasn't told through that lens. And yet, some may struggle to see it through any other. The book is the first accounting of the Biden administration from the person closest to the president himself. It tells us things we never knew, such as the fact that Jill supported the notion that Joe, now 83, should take a cognitive test, because she thought he could pass it. There are also details we've heard only from one side. Jill confirms, for example, that Vice President Kamala Harris urged Biden to endorse her immediately after he dropped out, just as Harris describes in her own telling of the 2024 race. These are stories she says she must share in order to tell her own. "It's a reflection of my 4 years," she says. Let's return to that rainy Saturday of July 20th, 2024, when President Biden, huddled with his top advisors at the family's vacation home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, wondered whether he should drop out of the presidential race. He had not been kept in a bubble of delusional optimism, Jill writes, but was drowning in a deluge of negative headlines about his re-election prospects. From the porch that afternoon, Biden called his wife to join him. He said, "What do you think, Jill? What do you think?" she recalls in our interview. I said, "No, Joe, I'm not giving you my opinion. This is a decision you have to make for yourself." This, she says, is how decisions work in the Biden household. Despite being one of her husband's closest advisors, someone who sat in on key political strategy meetings and the vetting of his vice presidential candidates, "I've always let Joe steer his own ship, as he has always let me steer mine," she writes, sometimes disagreeing with one another, but never second-guessing. She was adamant that she would support him no matter his decision. She was adamant that he was up for the job. And yet, in the book, she voices doubts, if not in his capacity to serve, then in his ability to overcome the public beliefs that he couldn't. In those trying weeks after the debate, she wondered if she could trust his doctors, advisors, or even herself. "Had he grown too old for the job and I hadn't noticed?" she writes. "I didn't think so, but could I be objective enough to be sure?" Through the book, we learn there are several things Jill Biden didn't share with her husband. She didn't think he could pull through the 2020 presidential primaries after his poor early showings. 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire. though she vowed to support Joe as long as he stayed in the race. She had worried about his lack of sleep in the final year of his presidency, waking up 7 times one night to use the bathroom, she notes, which can be a sign of a prostate issue, and flagged her concern to Joe's doctor instead of Joe because it's always been the nature of our relationship that we've maintained a veil of discretion around personal health, she writes. She knows how this sounds, old-fashioned, as she puts it in the book. We kept it separate. It was just the way we grew up, she says on Monday. I think it's generational. She similarly never told him about her menopause symptoms, the insomnia and night sweats. Then, of course, there are the things she didn't tell the American public, the things that Democrats are agitated to be revisiting now. She frames those decisions at the time as attempts to stay out of the fray, to play by the rules and ignore the ludicrous attacks. After the June 2024 debate and the discourse that followed, she writes that the biggest lesson was that if you don't explain something well enough, then the question won't go away. She winces now, hearing those words read aloud. I don't want to sound defensive about things that happened in the White House, she says. Should we have reacted more? I mean, is that a lesson I've learned as I look back? Maybe. Maybe I should have spoken out a little more, but I don't know. There's a paradox to being First Lady, as Jill notes throughout the book. The risk of being seen as too involved in her husband's presidency or too hands-off. Joe was the politician, she says, not me. But she still wants to say her piece. After we left the White House, so many people wrote books. So these were my reflections on my experiences, my years with Joe in the White House. There was also praise for her husband's administration and its accomplishments. That's something I worry people may have forgotten in all that came after, she writes. She titled her memoir after Trump began demolition on the East Wing, the traditional home of the First Lady's offices. Swaths of the book eulogize its demise, in particular the interactive tour displays and gallery of First Lady portraits Jill had taken care to update during her husband's administration. I loved the East Wing, she says on Monday. I loved it. She writes something nice about every living president and First Lady, save for Donald and Melania Trump. She says she hasn't read Melania's book nor seen her documentary. She refuses to weigh in when I ask if she thinks Trump's health has received sufficient scrutiny. Oh, I'm not going to talk about him, Jill says. In her 2019 memoir, Where the Light Enters, Jill contrasts Joe's capacity for forgiveness with her proclivity toward grudges, how she recalls every slight committed against the people I love. Near the end of her husband's term, that applied to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who Jill notes in the book had both privately told Biden to leave the race and publicly nudged him to do so on Morning Joe during those fateful July weeks. We were friends for 50 years, she told the Washington Post in January 2025. It was disappointing. She says her husband and the former speaker made up at Tatiana Schlossberg's funeral during the sign of peace ritual of a Catholic Mass. Jill herself hasn't made amends. I haven't actually seen her to make up with her or not make up with her. I didn't even see her in the church, she says, explaining that Joe had left his pew to shake the former speaker's hand. Pelosi wasn't immediately available to comment. That's what I've learned through this cancer diagnosis, Jill tells me. Life's so short. Why live with the anger and the pain of it all? I mean, move on. Let's move on. And now there's her husband's cancer. Prostate, stage 4, metastasized to his bones. It likely won't kill him, she writes, but he'll never be cured. He finished radiation therapy in October. Now he's on a hormone regimen that makes him tired and occasionally moody. Still, he takes the Amtrak to his Washington office once or twice a week. He gave a Memorial Day speech in Delaware and will speak at a Democratic gala in South Dakota on Friday. Jill, meanwhile, is chair of the Milken Institute Women's Health Network. She is still exercising most days and reading books by Ann Patchett and Elizabeth Strout. She's caring for Joe, making sure he schedules his doctor's appointments and takes his medications, and for her granddaughter Naomi's family, who are staying with the Bidens in Delaware for a few weeks, visiting from Los Angeles, and for her children, Ashley and Hunter, more present at the homestead in the wake of their father's diagnosis. Thank you, God, he's through his addiction and he has a new life, she says of Hunter. That new life includes a recent podcast appearance with Candace Owen, a far-right commentator. It's a curious choice. Owens once called Hunter, among other things, a degenerate and a crackhead. Jill hasn't listened, but respects his choices. That's one thing I think you're going to find out in life, she continues with a chuckle. You cannot control other people, even though you want them to do certain things or don't want them to do certain things. End of story. Your brain on anesthesia could be more like a coma than you think. This is a science short, subtitled, "A Study Suggests That Knowing What Is Happening in the Brain Could Change Anesthesia and Help It to Be More Personalized per Patient and More Closely Resemble Natural Sleep." 1 minute you're talking, the next you're out cold. But what's actually going on when you are under anesthesia? We often think of anesthesia as putting us in a deep sleep, but new research suggests it could actually be closer to being in a coma than previously thought. And there's still lots we don't know about how these drugs work on the brain, even though thousands of patients undergo a general anesthetic every day. In a recent study, researchers placed electrodes across the scalps of sedated patients, capturing their brainwave data. They compared these patterns against data from patients who were awake, asleep, or in a coma. The takeaway? The anesthetized patients' brains produced activity that shared similarities to being unconscious in a coma, as well as deep sleep, REM sleep, and patterns unique to anesthesia. It's a very strong perturbation of the system, this kind of profound manipulation of the brain, where a person goes from being highly cognitive functioning to basically unconscious, said Dr. Jana Helfrich, an anesthesiologist and neuroscientist at Yale University School of Medicine, and co-author of the research published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The brain didn't evolve to be anesthetized, so we want to understand how the brain comes back from it. Understanding these patterns could help doctors keep patients in a safer, more sleep-like state and reduce post-operative confusion and memory loss, according to Earl Miller, a professor of neuroscience at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who wasn't involved in the study. Anesthesia is considered safe, but there can be problems, some of them serious. Older patients or people with certain health conditions can experience neurocognitive issues after anesthesia, including memory or concentration problems, or postoperative delirium. Ultimately, gleaning what is happening in the brain could change anesthesia, helping it to be redesigned or personalized to more closely resemble natural sleep rather than a coma-like one, Helfrich said. Could we maybe tweak anesthesia a bit more in the direction of sleep by using different medications or combinations or infusion protocols, she added? That would make anesthesia more healthy and better for the brain, and then we could avoid some of the cognitive side effects. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's an obituary for Ruby Duncan, who lived from 1932 to 2026. She stormed Caesar's Palace to protest aid cuts. An organizer and mother of 7, Duncan was hailed as an advocate for Nevada's poor and racially oppressed. On March 6, 1971, a few thousand people marched down the Las Vegas Strip, clogging the glitzy artery through which the city's money flowed, to protest cuts to public assistance for the poor. They were largely mothers on welfare and their kids, but flanked by students, clergy, and celebrities like Jane Fonda, a human shield to deter police from beating them or retaliation from organized crime. The protesters, mostly black, held placards reading, "Don't gamble with human lives," while counter-protesters, mostly white, held one saying, "Do something honest for a change." When the march reached Caesar's Palace, its leader, Ruby Duncan, a diminutive mother of 7 with a 9th grade education, surprised even some of the protest's other organizers by leading everyone through the doors. "I wasn't afraid of nothing," recalled Duncan, who died in Las Vegas on April 26th at age 93. "I had 7 children and they got to be fed." Inside, the crowd ringed the casino. Pit bosses scrambled to secure chips. Shopkeepers at the boutique hid their furs. For half an hour, gambling came to a halt. Protesters sang, "We shall overcome." Over the next 2 decades, Duncan's organizing grew increasingly sophisticated and expansive, moving from the streets to the state legislature, to Washington, D.C., making her one of the most effective advocates for Nevada's poor and racially oppressed, the Las Vegas Review-Journal wrote. In a documentary, Storming Caesar's Palace, Duncan explained, "I came from no place, just slided in from out of nowhere. But when I came in pushy, and I've been pushy ever since." A migration to Vegas. Duncan was born Ruby Lee Phillips on June 7, 1932, near Tallulah, Louisiana, where her parents, Ira Bolden and Joseph Phillips, were sharecroppers on a white-owned plantation. 3 of her 4 siblings died young from accidents or illnesses, and her mother died before Duncan turned 4. She spent her childhood being passed among relatives, until, after being raped at 17 and having a child of her own, she left the plantation and in 1952 joined a migration of family members to Las Vegas. At the time, Las Vegas's black community was segregated into the city's west side, a shantytown without paved streets or indoor plumbing. Many residents, also migrants from the South, found work in kitchens and cleaning hotel rooms on the Strip, though they otherwise weren't welcome inside. In 1966, Duncan was working as a short-order cook at the Sahara, making 400 salads an hour, when she slipped on spilled grease, severely injuring her shoulder, hip, and back. She tried to return to work eventually, but passed out from the pain. Having left an abusive husband, Duncan was raising her 7 children on her own. 6 of Duncan's children survive her. She went to the welfare office seeking new job training. In Storming Caesar's Palace, a book by Dartmouth historian Annalise Orleck, on which the documentary was based, Duncan recalled telling them, "I can't stand very long, but there's nothing wrong with my hands, my eyes, or my ears." Instead, they put her on aid. Nevada's welfare benefits were among the most meager in the nation. Duncan received $120 a month, half of which went to rent. Duncan felt demeaned. "I hate welfare," she told the Nevada State Journal. "It makes me sick. I want to vomit. If they want to help me, then help me get off welfare by paying a decent wage." Only after her plight was the centerpiece of a Las Vegas Sun article about public assistance did the welfare department set her up with a sewing class. In 1969, 2 women who would become collaborators, Mary Wesley and Alversa Beals, brought Duncan to a meeting of the Clark County Welfare Rights Organization. By the end of the night, Duncan had been elected its president. Raids on welfare mothers. Las Vegas quickly became a proxy site in a freewheeling ideological slugfest over America's relationship to its poor. With Ronald Reagan's rise in California, demonizing welfare queens, and especially black women, as layabouts and grifters was becoming politically potent. The head of Nevada's welfare department, George Miller, was hardening his agency into a national model for a more aggressive approach. He sent armed agents to conduct raids on welfare mothers' homes, searching closets for men's clothes and medicine cabinets for razors, seizing on any evidence of a substitute father to justify cutting aid. Just before Christmas 1970, Miller abruptly cut the state's welfare rolls by roughly 75%, terminating aid to some 3,500 families without holding mandated hearings. By then, Duncan had enlisted the help of 2 Las Vegas attorneys who battled those cuts in the courts, as well as the National Welfare Rights Organization, a group co-founded by George Wiley, a Syracuse University chemist who had left academia for activism. Like Duncan's local affiliate in Las Vegas, Wiley's NWRO sought to reframe public assistance as a right to which society's most impoverished citizens were entitled, and not a favor they should plead for in shame. Now, in response to Miller's sweeping cuts to Nevada's welfare program, Wiley helped organize Duncan's siege of Caesar's Palace, as well as another attention-grabbing sit-in on the Strip the following week. Just days later, a federal judge ruled that Miller had been run roughshod over the constitutional rights of eligible and ineligible recipients alike, and restored the payments he cut. Duncan was making enemies. She told reporters that several times people tried to run her car off the road. Her daughter, Sandra Phillips Gilbert, said, "We got threatening calls every day. Every day." Phillips Gilbert recalled her mom disclosing years later that a man once came to her and confessed he had been hired to burn down their house, but ultimately couldn't go through with it, because he knew she was helping families like his. Meanwhile, Duncan was becoming an effective, self-taught lobbyist at the state capitol. She staged commodities luncheons, where she and other welfare mothers served lawmakers government cheese and canned meat. She pressured the legislature to implement the new Federal Social Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants and Children, WIC, as well as the larger food stamp system. She served as a delegate at the Democratic National Conventions in 1972 and 1976, and was appointed by President Jimmy Carter to his National Advisory Council on Economic Opportunity. Launching Operation Life. In September 1972, Duncan and several other welfare mothers opened Operation Life in the defunct Cove Hotel and Casino on Las Vegas's west side. Operation Life spun up free childcare, meals, job training, and drug prevention initiatives, ran a newspaper, opened a swimming pool and the neighborhood's first public library, and established a clinic that was soon seeing 2,000 children a month. Until then, children in the area generally saw doctors only in dire emergencies. Rickets, anemia, and other consequences of malnutrition were rampant. The organization was run almost entirely by poor black women, many of them on public assistance themselves, some of whom had even less formal education than Duncan, and largely on federal grants, which Duncan had a talent for securing on her trips to D.C. Ruby changed the lives of thousands of people who call Las Vegas and all of Nevada home, said Las Vegas Mayor Shelley Berkeley. Berkeley, who first met Duncan as a teenager, recalled visiting her last year during election season. She asked if I could get a registrar of voters to come to her assisted living facility and register the people living there, Berkeley said, and we did. So, up until her 90s, Ruby was still an activist. In the books section, here's a piece called Reading Marilyn. It's a review of 3 recent books about Marilyn Monroe. Those books are Marilyn and Her Books by Gail Crowther, published by Gallery, 304 pages for $30. A book called I Want to Be Loved by You by Andrew Wilson. Great Central is the publisher, 512 pages, price of $32.50. And a book titled simply Marilyn by Richard Merriman, published by Weldon Owen, 256 pages, and it's $50. And the review of those 3 books is as follows. What is left of Marilyn Monroe? Her name and image are everywhere, while her humanity grows more elusive. When her personal effects go on sale, as some of them did this week at Julien's auctions in Beverly Hills, California, they end up in private hands for ever larger sums, as if the thousands one spends on a half-used jar of her face cream might confer an exclusive human connection. She likely would have approved, having pledged her loyalty to the people who loved her movies, and not to Darrell F. Zanuck, her boss at 20th Century Fox, who assured her that she was not a star. She's a dumb tomato and half crazy to boot, he allegedly said, and paid her accordingly. Monroe's centenary arrives this month amid a push to reestablish her as a serious actress and a multidimensional person. Of the many celebratory publications, Marilyn and Her Books stands out for the success of its off-kilter approach. Its author, Gail Crowther, has a knack for finding new angles on unhappy literary women, including Dorothy Parker, Sylvia Plath, and Anne Sexton. Turning to Monroe, 1926 to 1962, Ms. Crowther inventories the actress's personal library for clues about her life and the mid-century America that shaped her. Monroe left behind more than 400 books, all of which were auctioned at Christie's in 1999. Some of them had accompanied her throughout a lifetime of itinerancy. She lived in at least 50 different places in her 36 years. During a Los Angeles childhood blighted by poverty and sexual abuse, she survived more than 10 foster homes and a stint in an orphanage. In 1942, she left high school to get married at 16. Divorced 4 years later and embarking on a Hollywood career, she came to regret her lack of formal education. She weathered 2 more brief, disastrous marriages in the following decade, to Joe DiMaggio, the retired Yankee center fielder, and to Arthur Miller, the playwright. In 1951, after appearing in nearly a dozen films, Monroe enrolled in a literature course at the University of California at Los Angeles. Photographers began to notice that her bookshelves were swelling with classics, and that Monroe could discuss them with fluency. One of the photographers remarked, "I realized that here was a girl not satisfied with what nature or education had given her, and who worked all the time trying to improve herself." This was not a conventional opinion. The press and the public usually reacted with suspicion and mockery upon seeing Monroe reading. Her fans wanted sexy comedy, not intellect. Always savvy about the commercial benefits of provocation, Monroe took the joke and lobbed it back, posing on satin bedspreads with such literary volumes as poetry by Heine and Whitman, plays by Ibsen, and Tolstoy's War and Peace. The most talked about image is Eve Arnold's 1955 portrait of the actress reading James Joyce's Ulysses, a novel that had been banned for obscenity. Monroe owned a first edition and kept it in her car, sometimes reading it aloud to herself. In Arnold's staging, the actress sits alone on a playground roundabout in shorts and a tank top, looking totally absorbed in the book's explicit final soliloquy. The photo remains a bellwether even today, revealing more about the yearnings and prejudices of its viewers than about the subject herself. Monroe's library contained books about gardening, pets, cooking, self-improvement, politics, religion, and theories of acting. Ms. Crowther notes that you can see in the background the same books on different shelves, in different rooms, of the various places Monroe lived, a testimony to books as comfort objects in her peripatetic life. Many of them bear the pencil marks of her annotations. Like all personal collections, Monroe's was a form of self-expression. In even as short a lifetime as hers, the author writes, it is like a memory kaleidoscope, shifting and revealing. Ms. Crowther makes a good case that Monroe's was a bigger, braver life than the headlines and gossip suggest. Fame brought her introductions to such literary heavyweights as Carson McCullers, Carl Sandburg, Jean-Paul Sartre, Edith Sitwell, and Dylan Thomas, all of whom came to regard her with respect and affection. She read obsessively about the art of acting and expanded her range with impressive dramatic roles in Don't Bother to Knock from 1952, Bus Stop 1956, and The Misfits 1961. Before she died of a barbiturate overdose in August of 1962, she was full of future plans, including a series of Shakespeare films for which she hoped to serve as the producer and star. 2 other books augment Miss Crowther's efforts to demythologize Monroe's character and career, though one wouldn't guess as much from their jacket art. Andrew Wilson's I Want to Be Loved by You, with a seductive cover image of the actress, offers a surprisingly sensible life history in quick-fire snippets of information, or 100 takes. Mr. Wilson is a journalist who has written biographies of Patricia Highsmith, Alexander McQueen, and Sylvia Plath. His prismatic approach here allows both breadth and depth in discussing the fragmentary nature of Monroe's identity, and is perhaps most effective in debunking conspiracy theories, including the belief that she was secretly murdered at the request of Robert F. Kennedy. The author also mentions a particularly poignant interview Monroe gave to Richard Merriman at Life magazine that was published during the weekend of her death. That interview now appears in book form, along with an extensive photo portfolio by Alan Grant in Marilyn, The Lost Photographs, The Last Interview, a sumptuous volume that screams coffee table chic. It's pink, it's pretty, she's pretty. But inside, in Monroe's own words, is a forceful argument for her complex humanity. Funny, thoughtful, courageous, vulnerable, and shrewd, she casts aside imitators. Oh God, there's been enough of me. And objecting to the notion that she cranks herself up to prepare for a scene, she makes a plea for artists that resonates today. Cranking is something mechanical, and I think that's kind of disrespectful to refer to it that way, she says, because we're not machines. We weren't meant to be machines. We've got the sensibilities, and we've got to hold on to them for dear old life, or else we haven't gotten anything. Not on this planet or any other. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's a piece titled What Jane Rosenthal Learned from De Niro. The producer and Tribeca Festival co-founder discusses where she sees the media industry headed and the must-see films at this year's event. In college, Jane Rosenthal couldn't pick a major. She was interested in too many subjects, which is precisely what led her to study film. She found that it gave her the freedom to explore everything she was interested in, from theater and art to history. Over the course of her career as a producer, she worked on films based on the early founding of the CIA and the American Indian movement, as well as comedies like Meet the Parents franchise. It's fun going into different worlds, spending time with different characters, she said. Rosenthal, 69, co-founded the Tribeca Festival alongside Robert De Niro in 2002, in the aftermath of 9/11, as a way to revitalize downtown Manhattan. This week marks the 25th year of the festival. In addition to her work at Tribeca Enterprises, Rosenthal has produced The Irishman, When They See Us, and Bohemian Rhapsody with De Niro. It was so personal and so emotional to be here at the time and saying, what can I do for my neighborhood? What can I do for kids that are scared? How do you give them a new memory? How do you give them something to look forward to, she said. Rosenthal lives on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Here she discusses the secret to her 37-year-long creative partnership with De Niro, where she sees the film industry headed, and the skincare brand she's obsessed with. What time do you get up on Mondays, and what's the first thing that you do after waking up? I get up at 6:30, and then I hit my alarm clock for another 10 minutes. At that point, Lucy, my dog, a Maltipoo, is usually sitting by my bed going, whining sound, which means, would you get up now and feed me? And then I'll go, shh, and she'll stop for a few minutes, and the alarm clock goes off, and then, boom, we launch. How do you like your breakfast or coffee? Black. I'm really not hungry till 11. What do you eat once you're hungry? I'll have a breakfast wrap, or I'll order a smoothie from Juice Generation. It's just a strawberry smoothie with coconut milk and something else. It's supposed to be healthy. Do you have any grooming or skincare rituals? Who doesn't have a skincare ritual? Especially at advanced ages, you must have a skin ritual. Moisturizing in a dry New York apartment is very important for a girl. What products can you not live without? For the past year, I've been kind of obsessed with Ourself, which I found through my friend. It makes my skin glow. Can't you see it? What about exercise? I reach up for a cup of coffee. It's a good stretch to reach up for a cup of coffee. I stretch. Stretching is very important. With Lucy, she does downward dog. She's a very good instructor. And then usually running around. What are some films that you're excited about on the festival lineup this year? We have one film, Salah, that was made by a young woman who came through her Lens mentorship program that just grabs you. It's this story of a young girl who has to take a ride from Texas to another state. She's with her dog. You don't know where she's really going. It's terrific. It's one of those rare short films that feels like you've experienced a feature-length story in just 20 minutes. There's another short film which is 14 minutes long about a young family during the Khmer Rouge. It's got a birthing scene like no other. What's your secret to your successful creative partnership with Robert De Niro? To not discuss it. It's like any relationship. It's about communication and knowing when to push or not push. We've been together a really long time. My longest relationship, and his longest relationship. Are there places in New York worth braving a line? No, nothing's worth standing in line. That's a good New York attitude. One of my favorite places, I found it by accident on the Upper West Side, is Janie's Life-Changing Baked Goods. They're basically mini apple pies or blueberry pies. When they're fresh, they're just amazing. The festival has adopted different ways of storytelling in the past 25 years. What other forms of storytelling are you open to? And if you're curious, which I think I have insatiable curiosity, I'm constantly exploring new ways of telling stories, and that's exciting. One of the things that a festival does is bring into a community the new types of creators that are out there and curates it for you. I think a lot of what's going on with some of the short films and AI is bringing a whole new creator class into the culture, and I think that's exciting. The film industry is changing a lot, especially with so many consolidations. Where do you see the industry heading? It's going to be a bumpy night, to quote All About Eve. On one hand, it could be an opportunity for independence to rise again, and you're starting to see it. There'll be different distribution models. Suddenly, YouTube is one of the biggest platforms out there. It's definitely a major change for how we tell stories and what we tell. We have to keep being original. Here's a column called Masterpiece Paul Revere, 1768 by John Singleton Copley. It's a story about a prophetic painting of Paul Revere. And it's got an illustration of the painting with Paul, and it says, the portrait is at once a tribute to the dignity of craftsmen and a work of canny political symbolism. Ken Burns' 2025 series, The American Revolution, taught some sobering, complicating lessons about our political national myth. John Singleton Copley's 1768 portrait of Paul Revere at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts does something similar, on a smaller scale and in a different medium. Many people think of Revere, who lived from 1735 to 1818, only as the patriot immortalized in Longfellow's 1861 poem, Paul Revere's Ride, filled with historical inaccuracies, published just before the start of the Civil War. One off by land and two off by sea, etc. In his day, however, he was more famous as a silversmith. His work was prized for decades, well after the Revolution itself. Copley, 1738 to 1815, and his sitter occupied different positions socially and politically. In 1765, Revere had joined an organization that would soon become the Sons of Liberty, a radical group calling for protest against taxes. Copley came from Irish immigrant stock, but made himself a gentleman. In 1769, he married into a wealthy Tory family. His father-in-law was a merchant who received the tea that provoked the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Things were brewing in many ways, and on several fronts. The moment of this picture might be thought as the calm before the storm. In the portrait, which is 35 by 28.5 inches, a pink-cheeked, square-jawed, and thoughtful Revere looks out, his head propped on his right hand. His left hand clutches a silver teapot, in a gesture midway between a caress and a grasp. He is gazing neither directly at us, nor at the object he is holding. What is he pondering? The picture offers clues. Copley revolutionized American portraiture through his deft handling of paint, and still more through his use of objects and clothing to combine individual psychology with social status. Surfaces reveal depths. Revere is dressed like a craftsman, not a gentleman, with close-cropped hair, no powdered wig, and an open-collared, billowing linen shirt, no cravat, with an undergarment visible. He seems manly, solid, earnest. But he also wears a dark green vest that some scholars think is silk. It has gold buttons. His fingernails, seen up close, are relatively clean, as is the surround. He is not sitting at a workbench, but at a mahogany table, polished to a fairly well, and reflecting the sitter. The teapot is equally shiny, and it reflects Revere's fingers. Things shimmer. Against a somber black background, the sitter comes vividly alive. Revere is surely contemplating his next move. His teapot's surface, like his still youthful face, is unlined. The craftsman is getting ready to add the finishing touches, inscriptions, or designs to his work. His teapot rests on a sand-filled leather bag, which typically served as a base on which a smith would hold and balance the piece he was making. On the picture's lower left lie 3 tools of the engraver's trade: 2 burins for making large designs, and an etching needle for smaller ones. Copley has cunningly offered us, however, more than a pause in an artist's actions. He has represented a moment in history as well as in a man's thoughts. Tea is the clue. In 1767, the Townsend Acts had placed duties on imports, including glass, paper, and tea. These did not sit well with many of the colonists. The Boston Tea Party occurred on December 16, 1773. The intervening years were tense. Both Revere, the patriot, and Copley, the successful portraitist, becoming a rich man, would have understood the symbolism. The painter might have put his sitter's hands around some other silver object, like a coffee pot, a tray, or a tankard. He chose the teapot. Copley was largely self-taught, there being little formal arts education in the colonies. But his stepfather was an engraver, and the precocious lad saw books with plenty of pictures. He painted his first portrait at age 14, and was adept also in pastels. He had become acquainted with Revere by 1763, and purchased things from him, mostly small silver frames, but the relationship did not last beyond 1770, the year of the Boston Massacre. The portrait may have been a partial payment for his debt to Revere. The man who immortalized the man who made a midnight ride to Lexington left the colonies in 1774, moved to London, and never returned. Having mastered portraiture in Massachusetts, he then perfected, along with his fellow expatriate, Benjamin West, a new kind of history painting in England. He traveled on the continent. He became a full member of the Royal Academy in 1783. He made portraits of visitors like John Adams and his son John Quincy. But in his earlier picture of another Bostonian, a man with political views different from his own, he proved how a commercial engagement could reflect and even transcend a fraught political moment. The Revere portrait celebrates the dignity of work, showing that an artisan can look as calm and thoughtful as a philosopher. This reflects an uplifting democratic impulse based in economics as well as philosophy. It is a piece of historical irony that Copley's portrait lay unregarded for more than a century in the attic of one of Revere's descendants. Only since 1928 has the public been able to see it. Looking back allows us to see what form the future, on both the political and artistic fronts, could take. The author of that piece, Mr. Spiegelman, the author of Nothing Stays Put, The Life and Poetry of Amy Clampett, writes about literature and fine art for the Journal. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 6th to June 7th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday at 7 p.m. Your reader has been Jim Michaely. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times. At 9 o'clock, we got Harper's Magazine. And at 10 o'clock is episode number 4 of The Shop on Hidden Lane by Jane Ann Krentz. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which